Hey, it's Chris. Today I want to give you an update on my favorite Mac, the MacBook Air. I'm going to throw the model year and the specs up on the screen here so you can get an idea of what it is that I've been using and experiencing. I gotta be honest, there's one reason to get a MacBook Air. It's the form factor and its lightness. It's very compact. It's easy to take with you. It doesn't get in your way. And that's what I like about this Mac. So in terms of expectations, that's basically what I expected from this MacBook Air, which for me is a workhorse device. I rely on it. It's not something that I'm gonna use to edit heavy duty video content, for instance. I'm not doing 3D CAD design. What I am doing is using it to move my business forward at a decent cost, right? A nice price. But the real question I think is, how has it held up? Has there been any hiccups in terms of the performance? Because this isn't Apple's biggest beast of a machine, right? I did do a review of the biggest, newest, craziest 16-inch MacBook Pro recently, so you can look that up on the channel. But especially the colorway. This was the first time that this particular blue color was available on the MacBook lineup. And I had to snag it right away because I really liked it. It was different. I've continued to like it because it's different. I didn't regret not having a silver, even the new black color for the MacBook Pros. That's really cool, but there's something about this blue that really does appeal. So I'll just get that out of the way right away. The color for me has maintained like a champ. I haven't had any issues with scratching it up or having that color wear away, but also I treat it really nicely. So I'm not stuffing it in a bag every single day and taking it with me places. It's really more of an around the office, around the house sort of laptop for me. That doesn't mean, however, that it isn't an absolute fingerprint magnet. It is, and that was something that a lot of people called out immediately when it was released. But it's one of those things like, what are you gonna do about it? It doesn't detract from the performance at all. Some people are just not gonna be able to stand it. You can wipe it down, whatever. It doesn't really bother me too much. Otherwise, the build quality has been excellent here. For such a thin, light computer, I mean, you would expect it to be a little less rugged, wouldn't you? Just right out of the box. But for me, that hasn't been the case. One thing I'll say about the design here with the two USB-C ports is I like having three. My main MacBook Pro that I rely on for all my heavy duty stuff does have more ports, and that does come in handy. Sometimes you want to connect to an iPad and do some screen sharing and universal control. And at the same time, you don't want two different cords coming in to charge everything. You just want to have one cord charging the computer, maybe one running to the iPad to power everything. If you're going to use any sort of external storage, and I do that more frequently than I used to actually because I'm moving between devices a lot and shooting a lot more and a lot more higher quality footage. So there goes another port. And then if you have any other sort of accessory connected there, the ports get used up really fast. So I do miss not having more ports on here. I will say that. Now, in terms of the performance, speed and responsiveness, zero complaints. But that comes down to expectations and use cases. I'm not using this to do anything crazy, right? I'm usually typing, researching, emailing, surfing the web. It's that sort of a device for me. Now, I have pushed it a little bit in the department of using some local LLMs on here, and those can get pretty intensive, right? So there's certain models that aren't gonna run on here, but there's some decent mid-sized models that I can get away with running locally on here. For a lot of people, I think this is gonna be a go-to productivity machine. So it pairs perfectly with my productivity course designed specifically for the Apple ecosystem to help you get more out of all of your devices, do more in less time. So check that out, it's linked up down below. That said, due to the sort of work that I'm doing on here, which would include some design, I'm doing some Photoshop, right? Using some of the Adobe suite of products when I have to. Not seeing any overheating issues. The thermals are excellent for this sort of device, the size, the class, the thinness. It's great at managing that heat for what it does and what it costs. And because a lot of what I use this device for revolves around the keyboard, I'm happy to report I love the keyboard on this version of the MacBook Air. Now, my wife is still using a previous version of the MacBook Air that had the butterfly keyboard with all the issues, and she's really had some issues with that. That's all been fixed now. So no more keyboard issues. The keyboard is very nice, punchy. I like the key travel. Some people don't, but it's been working great for me. Of course, with the laptop meant to be this portable, you really are going to be looking for good battery life. And I have to say, unlike my iPad Pro, which is getting a little long in the tooth now, I feel, this thing hasn't had any battery issues, any battery struggles. I know a lot of people end up comparing an iPad Pro and a MacBook Air. It's sort of a natural comparison when you're looking at the pricing. And the iPad Pro definitely has disappointed me a little bit in terms of the battery life over the long haul for the most current model versus this Air. I mean, I've been pretty happy with how the battery has performed here. I don't end up saying, there's one thing about this, it's the battery. I wish that it was better or different. It's about what I would expect. Sometimes I've had Macs in the past where, after a while, I've started installing some battery management apps to help kind of tone things down, sort of like a low power mode on steroids to keep things humming along as good as possible. I haven't had to do anything like that here. The battery has been pretty good. The iCloud integration has been solid, no Bluetooth issues, no Wi-Fi issues. So if you're looking for a cheaper entry into the Apple ecosystem where you can use all the continuity features and have something that pairs really well with your iPhone, with your AirPods, with all of Apple's, fun accessories, then this is definitely something that is going to be a solid performer in my experience. Now, this particular model has Touch ID built in, and I got to tell you, it hasn't seen any degradation over time. I like Face ID on my iPad. I like it on my iPhone. I wish that it was here for the Mac, but it's not. And it's not the end of the world. Most of the time, I end up just logging in with my Apple Watch anyways. So when I sit down, crack it open, I'm just logged in because of the watch. But for authorizing purchases, for instance, or managing passwords, the Touch ID is fine. I have no issues with it. And that button has worked solid. Now, this is a MacBook Air. It's not a MacBook Pro, so it doesn't have Apple's latest, greatest, brightest, best display technology inside. But that said, for what I use it for, which is mostly light computing, I have zero complaints about the screen. What I can say is I never sit there and look at the screen and say, that's too dull, or that's not bright enough, or the text isn't crispy enough. And that's coming from somebody who uses the Studio Display a lot, who uses the MacBook Pro, the iPad Pro, obviously the Pro iPhones. So really no complaints from me. The colors look good, no worries. Now I do want to talk about the speakers and the mics a little bit. I am somebody who does a lot of creating. I do a lot of video content, audio content, and so a couple of things here. The playback from the speakers is nice. For the size and how thin this device is, it's really great. It's not LG flat screen TV blow you away. Like, how did that sound come out of such a thin thing? Sort of nice, but it's still better than I would expect, I would say, from a device that's this thin, from this price range. Apple's done a really good job over the last few years integrating some really nice sounding mics into all of their devices, even the lower end devices. And while it's not as good as, say, the mic I've got here in the studio, it's also good enough that I would record on it in a pinch if I was traveling and I forgot some audio equipment or something. I would record an episode of a podcast or something on this in a pinch and be like, yeah, that's good enough to put up. So after all this time of using it, would I say it's a good investment for your money? You're probably getting the vibe already that I don't have a whole lot of complaints here. This is a fun device. It is enjoyable to use. I really don't have any regrets. It's absolutely been one of my favorite computers to use ever, I would say, from Apple. And whenever I have to use a different Mac, like the MacBook Pro, as much as I love the Pro, I still find myself being like, I really like that Air factor. This is such an enjoyable machine. That's all I'm going to say. Now, the one thing that I don't like is something that I don't like in a lot of Apple devices, and that's the price for upgrading the internals, right? Apple charges an arm and a leg for memory, for storage. That's just what happens in the Apple ecosystem, and you can't go in and upgrade that stuff later. But that's really it for me on this device. I hope that was a useful follow-up. Technically, I love this thing. I have very little bad to say about it. So for me, it's a double thumbs up. If this is something you're looking at, grab it.